also read the statements to the client to make sure that they understood the following points as well, and they acknowledged that they had a right to withdraw from the consultation at any time. They understood their results will be kept private unless they chose them to be shared. They understood they need to complete this form before undergoing any exercise, and a medical form to highlight any medical conditions or injuries that could put them at risk, and that they knew there was a risk of injury, but they can reduce the chances by following the guidance as shown, and understand that all the guidance and goals are being introduced are into making a development program to help encourage a healthier lifestyle. And they agreed to all the points and signed and dated the informed consent at the bottom. They were consenting to the health consultation and the health screening exercises, and I made sure that they understood fully what they were consenting to and explained throughout the process what was going to happen. So in terms of the health screening tests, as the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, we weren't able to conduct the health screening tests in person, so we had to do them over remotely. But first of all, we also conducted the resting heart rate check as we did with client 1, but client 2's resting heart rate was 80 beats per minute. And if we look at the picture in the top right hand corner, we can see that 80 beats per minute on this scale for her age group was actually on the border between below average and poor. So this was one of her weaknesses of the health screening tests, that her heart rate was lower than where it should be. So her heart rate should have been in the around 70 to around 74 mark, as opposed to the 80 mark. So we know from that she's below average. However, heart rate can vary depending on individuals, and some sources say that heart rate can vary from 65 to 100 beats per minute, resting heart rate, as an average. So some sources would say that her heart rate was acceptable, but I've decided to go with a credible source that has produced these results that are quite consistent, and so I've identified that she's below average. And we can see in the picture here that I told her when she was administrating the heart rate test that she could use her index and middle finger on her wrist or her neck, and she decided that it was most comfortable to use her wrist, which is absolutely fine. And she counted for 60 seconds the amount of beats she felt, and she told me that, so that was great. And this table just reiterates what I've just said, that she is for a woman of her age, she is within the below average category. She's quite close to the only 2 beats per minute to the average, so this could be something that we can easily adjust depending on when she's participating in the exercise program. And the graph here is just showing the difference between her score of 80 beats per minute and the average, which is around 75. So how much she would need to decrease her heart rate by in order to be at a healthy resting heart rate. This may reflect the idea that she's not participating in as much physical exercise as she was. If we'd done this before, we may have obviously got a lower resting heart rate, because obviously she was quite sporty and she was taking part in a lot of sports. So that could be an effect as to why it's quite high. Or it may just be on the day she'd done an activity beforehand which had exerted her, and so yeah, it was not necessarily the most accurate representation, but it gives us a guideline to go off of. In terms of her blood pressure, I got the client to measure their blood pressure using a device, and they got the results of 130 systolic pressure over 90 diastolic pressure in millimeters of mercury. If we look at this diagram, we can see that the normal blood pressure is around 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury, the middle value between 130. So anything from 100 to 130 and 65 and 85 is considered normal blood pressure. So her blood pressure, you could say, is on the border of normal blood pressure, but it's entering the stages of pre-hypertension. So although she's above average in the normal blood pressure category, and her blood pressure is not too much over the average, however, it has the potential to enter these high blood pressure stages, which is something that we don't want, because obviously you can see as we go up, then emergency care is needed and it becomes more serious as the blood pressures increase. So at the moment, it's not that much of an issue, but we'd like for her to get it down to about 120/80, which is the average. But it's just something we will be monitoring, and with the strategies we're going to put in place, I'm sure that we can easily adjust her blood pressure just fine to reduce the risk of her developing hypertension and then potentially more severe long-term effects from having a high blood pressure. And this graph is also just reiterating the fact that in terms of the client systolic and diastolic pressure, if we compare these to sort of the low, normal and high and severe categories, we can see that the client is significantly higher than where we would want them to be. However, they're not in the severe category, which is a very good strength. We don't want them to obviously be having very severe blood pressure, and they're quite close to the normal field, so that's something that we would be looking at, just to decrease slightly but try to maintain it. In terms of the client's body mass index, we can see here that the client measured her weight using a weight scales, calibrated it to 0 kilograms, and then measured that for me. And we got 56.2 kilograms, and they measured their height, and it was 172 centimeters. Once we had those two values, we used the BMI calculator, which took the client's weight over their height squared to determine a body mass index of 19. This is the criteria for BMI. So anything under 18.5 is considered underweight. Healthy is considered 18.5 and anything between that and 25. Overweight is between 25 and 30, and anything over 30 is considered to be obese. So if we put it into that category, we can see 19 is a healthy weight. For her age, because obviously her weight is around 56 and her height is around 172, we can see that she's in that normal range category, which is good, which is the average for her age group. However, slightly concerns me that 19 is quite close to 18.5. It's only 0.5 of a margin, so there is a potential that she could drop to being underweight. So this BMI we'd be looking at to sustain, and I think maybe to increase her body mass index slightly more to around the 22 mark, and that would be much easier than to sustain than 19 would. As we can see with this graph, just reiterating the idea that she's quite close to the underweight, but she's within that healthy mark, so it's nothing too concerning, but obviously we need to control that, and it has the potential to go into the underweight category if it's not controlled. And the last health screening questionnaire we conducted was the waist to hip ratio check test. They measured their hip circumference, which was 70, and their waist, which was 84 centimeters. And we used that by dividing the hip and the waist measurements to get a waist hip ratio of 0.83. And here is the test. So I made sure that the participant had a tape measure in centimeters, told them that they needed to measure the part of their torso which dips inwards, that's their hips, smallest part of their torso, and their waist, and their hips, which is where their body curves back out again, and I made sure they were doing that properly, and they gave me the readings. In terms of comparing two normative values, if we take the client's result of 0.83 for a female of X, in terms of the norms, she is within the average category, which is good, so she's not at risk, but she could be better, and we could even get that to around 0.79 into the good category, or even in the excellent category. However, the waist to hip ratio doesn't really take into consideration other factors as well as the BMI. It's only taking into consideration a participant's waist and hip ratio. It's not really taking into consideration their height and weight, same with the BMI. So therefore, it's not as an accurate representation of their overall waist hip ratio. But it gives us a good indication of where the participant is, and as they're in average, it's good, it's not a concern. They're only 0.3 off going into the at-risk category, which is not too bad, but we could in fact get them to push into the good category and even excellent if not. But showed by this graph, we can see that the client's waist hip ratio of 0.83 compared to the average is pretty much identical, and they're not far off being in the good category. They're around 4 to 5 0.45 off of the good category, so that's something that's quite good for the client. So in terms of before we set their goals and look at the recommendations for strategies, as previously mentioned in my other video, looking at constants or choices and how constants are things that we can't control, they're beyond our control. So we can't control our age, our genes, our gender, our ethnicity. That's things that are evolved from our genetics and our environment that we can't control. However, it's the factors that we can control, which are our choices that we make in life, will determine obviously our blood pressure, our good and bad cholesterol. This is depending on how much exercise we do, our alcohol consumption, our smoking consumption. That can ultimately affect that. But factors like that can affect our weight and anything that can have some sort of change, we have control over, which is variable. So it's good to highlight the difference between constants and choices. In terms of the evaluation of the health screening questionnaire, I identified some strengths and weaknesses in the different evaluation areas. So firstly, we have the goals of the participant. In terms of their strengths, she had clear goals she wanted to achieve. She wanted to improve her cardiovascular fitness, run a 10K, which is very ambitious, and tone and build muscle. They were clear, specific, and she knew what she wanted to achieve. And this was down to her high motivation levels are high. So 7 out of 10 motivation levels are really, really good. And the fact that her family is quite supportive of her as well was a strength and would mean she was more likely to achieve her goals. And she's also accomplished previous goals as well. The yoga challenge, going to the gym 4 times a week for 3 months is very, very good. Shows that she has the capability to achieve goals if she puts her mind and her motivation levels towards it. However, the areas for improvement in terms of her goals, her targets weren't smart, and we had a conversation about this because her time frame was only of 2 months, and having a time frame of 2 months would be quite difficult to achieve all 3 of those goals in a time frame of 2 months. So I suggested making short-term and long-term goals that she could use and build up towards slowly, because we wouldn't want her to sustain an injury, which ultimately would affect then her overall performance in the exercise program, and she may not achieve the goals that she wants to, which could decrease her motivation levels, which is something we don't want to do. Her current lifestyle would need to be changed in order to adapt to meet her goals. There are some factors, as we're going to mention, that are contributing to her lifestyle, which are quite negative. So if we were just to change those or make more positive changes, then we would start to see more results. The strengths of physical activity, she enjoys exercising and her family is very active. So this is good. She's got this sort of system and she can exercise with them. And she likes sports as well and can be very active. So we can also make this exercise program revolve around her interests and her likes. So because she likes swimming and tennis, we could incorporate exercises that involve her swimming. So if she doesn't like long distance running, for example, we could do long distance swimming, and tennis we can do for short hit workouts. We can do like passing and serves and things like that to do some sort of physical activity with her interests. However, her areas for improvement are she only incorporates low intensity activities into her workout. So she's only doing leg exercises and walks and yoga. So she's not burning many calories. And as we're going to see with the amount of food that she eats later on, this is quite an issue. She also, in order to meet her goals, she needs to do more endurance training and resistance training into her workouts. Because to run a 10-kilometre, you need to obviously have that muscular endurance and cardiovascular fitness, and resistance training as well if she wants to tone and see results. So we would gradually incorporate that into her workouts, and she would start doing that as well. In terms of nutrition, strength, she has breakfast every morning, which is good, the most important meal of the day, which gives her fuel for the rest of the day. And her daily water intake is balanced and she maintains it throughout the day, contributing to the daily recommendations. It's not quite 7 glasses a day, but 3 to 4 glasses is still considered quite good. In terms of her areas for improvement, her calorie intake is higher than the recommended number, so she's consumed more calories than 2,000 a day. This is meaning she has a lower metabolic rate as calories are not being burned. So this is explaining her weight gain and how she feels that she can't achieve the activity she used to, because she's not burning enough calories, and while she's eating more food, it's making her more fatigued and tired.